In 1974, a man named Harry Chapin released a song that has been famous pretty much ever since, called "The Cat's in the Cradle." And in this song, Chapin tells a story of a father who has a son, but this father's too busy to be involved in the son as he's growing up, and paints some rather sad images. And throughout the song, in the chorus, the boy says, "I'm going to be like you, Dad. I'm going to be like you." But his dad wasn't there when the boy learned how to walk. And when he came home for his birthday, he didn't have time to throw a baseball and teach him how to catch because he was busy. And the song kind of ends in a sad note. And I'm going to read you the last verse of the song. And this is the man, and he's been speaking throughout this song, and it closes with this. It says, "I've long since retired and my son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you, if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my job's a hassle and my kids have the flu. But it's been sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you." And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. We're dealing with Proverbs, and we've been studying the wisdom that comes from Scripture. And we're coming to a point in Proverbs where it's starting, there's some statements in Proverbs chapter 23 that have to do with the relationships of parents to children, right? And what does the Bible teach us about how we raise our children? How does parenting work? And if you're out there and you're thinking, well, I don't have kids, I think there's still some valuable stuff, because you may have an impact on a child's life. And I think the principles for parents and children in their relationships are valuable regardless if you are a parent, because you have a mother or father, and there's some wisdom here too that guides that. And even if you say, well, I don't really know my parents, right? The situation is such that I'm not connected to them. Well, you may have an impact. And I think this is valuable things. And so we're going to look at something here. We're going to try and understand what the Bible and what the wisdom of Scripture says about the relationship between parents and children. And I want to be completely honest as I start this. I am not a psychologist. I am not an expert in parenting. I have one child who's 5 months old. So I have almost no experience. So I come here not as an expert, but I do want to share some things that I think we find in Scripture that are principles that Proverbs teaches us, and that we can apply to the relationships in that parent-child relationship. And it's not just biological in the sense, but you may have an impact on a child and fill that parental role. You might be a teacher. You might be some type of mentor. And I think these principles apply. So I hope that you're not sitting here and listening and say, well, this doesn't apply to me. I think it applies to everyone. Because even more than the parent-child, the mentor-mentee relationship, I think if we apply these principles just to life, we will have better success, and we will live in a way that Proverbs has been teaching us to live, in a way that honors and pleases God and man. So we're going to pull this out and we're going to look at it. We're studying, one of the chapters we're studying this week is chapter 23 of Proverbs. And chapter 23 of Proverbs has several sections that talk about this relationship between parent-child, right? And in the beginning, the whole book of Proverbs is written as a speech of a father to a son, right? It's all about this relationship and this passing on of knowledge and wisdom, and this back and forth. And it's also has motherly wisdom, and it talks about not disgracing your mother and being kind to your mother. There's all this filled through it. But we want to look at these couple verses, and we're going to kind of unpack it. And ultimately, what we're looking at is, how are we going to parent like Jesus? How are we going to be parents in the same way that Jesus parents us? And so we're going to look at this, but some text real quick. The first one here in Proverbs chapter 23, it's verse 13 through 16, and we're going to get the picture here in Proverbs. Proverbs 23, 13 through 16, it says, "Don't fail to discipline your children. The rod of punishment won't kill them. Physical discipline may well save them from death. My child, if your heart is wise, my own heart will rejoice. Everything in me will celebrate when you speak what is right." So we have this first part here, and we'll notice the discipline comes up. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But there's the kind of nature of these 4 verses here is that correction isn't going to damage a child. And we'll talk about what the Bible means by discipline, because sometimes this gets a hard thing, and that it actually brings joy to parents when children make good choices. The other section in this chapter that kind of talks about the relationship between parents and children is verses 22 through 25 in chapter 3, and they say this: "Listen to your father who gave you life, and don't despise your mother when she is old." Right? More advice to children here about the relationship to their parents. It says, "Get the truth and never sell it. Also get wisdom, discipline, and good judgment. The father of godly children has cause for joy. What a pleasure to have children who are wise. So give your father and mother joy. May she who gave you birth be happy." So there's this counsel here that we see in this chapter to both children and parents, right? So parents, it's told, don't shy on discipline, right? And we have to understand this, right? Because, and once again, I'm not an expert in child discipline. So I encourage you, if you have children, or you're planning to have children, or you fulfill a role where you are in charge of children, look to the best possible research out there, because children are different, right? Some need a more quiet approach to guidance, and some need a little more structured, right, and rigid approach. And you need to figure that out, because they're all kind of personality types. But what Proverbs is clear about here is that just letting children run wild, right, and letting them have whatever they want is actually not good for them, right? They need structure. So structure in life, and sometimes that's physical structure. Sometimes that's a physical reminder, right? And a physical reminder can simply be, hey, you need to sit here for a little while. It doesn't have to be a striking of the child. Sometimes we think of this strictly in the sense of some type of like painful reminder, right? A spanking. And that's not outside of what this is saying, but that's not the only thing that this is saying. And then it says that children, right, when you honor and you are wise, it brings joy. Like parents take great joy in seeing children succeed. So be wise, seek knowledge, seek wisdom, seek understanding. Learn from your parents, learn from the people around you. Now the reality is we live in a world that not every child has a positive mentor or parent that they should be learning from. Lots of children grow up, and each one of us grows up because all humans are imperfect, where we get examples from our parents that we actually have to learn that's not what I should do. And so I don't want to discount that, but we're looking here at this wisdom and what's going on. And I want to share with you some principles that are in Proverbs here in totality. If you don't trust me, go read Proverbs, but they are there of good guidance, right, for children. And discipline, right, we talked about kind of the physical thing, right? But then there's also, Proverbs teaches discipline. In other words, discipline that could be understood as hard work, right? As following through on something you start, right? Being disciplined, in other words, sticking with something, not just letting things go. And so Proverbs absolutely teaches that as a parent, it's our responsibility to give our children an opportunity to learn hard work, to be disciplined in their actions, right? And this isn't always easy, right? And at different ages, it looks different. But this is something that is taught throughout there. So not only there needs to be a consequence for poor behavior, right? There needs to be a consequence. And a lot of times there's a perfectly natural consequence that the parent doesn't need to step in, right, and inflict a consequence. For example, if you say to your child, hey, you need to wear a coat when you go outside because it's cold. And the child, I don't want to wear a coat. Well, you need to wear a coat, and you have this back and forth. Maybe just let them go outside and get cold. They'll learn soon enough that they need to wear a coat, right? There's some of these natural things. Oh, I don't want to wear shoes. Well, maybe a hurt foot once or twice isn't the end of the world, but it teaches that lesson rather than having a battle with these things. So discipline is important both in the consequence and in the instruction of doing well, according to Proverbs. Also, wisdom. Wisdom is something that as parents to children, we are to strive to impart. And wisdom is an important thing. And I think any honest person will realize that there is way more that they don't know than they do know. And so the things that you know and that you are sure of and you are sure are very good, you should absolutely pass on to the children or the people in your life that you have an impact on. But I think we can agree that there is a vast majority of wisdom and ideas and experience that exists in the world. And so we don't want to just completely contain our children and not give them valuable experiences, right? And valuable experiences is about learning. Sometimes valuable experiences involve failing. Sometimes valuable experiences involve allowing a child to deal with a difficult idea, right? And work that critical thinking. See, wisdom isn't just a regurgitation of knowledge. Wisdom is the ability to exist in a world in a way that is beneficial to those around you. And so it involves impact. So I would say if you are able to give your child more experiences, right? Take them to different places. Help them to see how different things work. Take them visit other people's homes and help them to see how things are done in different people's homes, right? Have conversations about, hey, what did we see here? What do we see as positive? What maybe we think is do different? So our family does it this way and that family does it this way. Is one right or wrong, or is there simply just a different way of doing it? You see, wisdom is vast and experience is so important. And we live in a world that we feel like we're really connected, but in a lot of ways we are isolated to people who think like us and act like us and look like us. I have a friend who, wonderful guy, and he grew up in northern Minnesota in a very Scandinavian area, and it was a completely homogenous community. Everybody looked the same. Everybody came basically from the same place in an ancestry, and there was nothing wrong with it. And he said he wasn't until he was a senior in high school where he was in a situation where he was in the minority. He was playing a basketball tournament, and he went in, and it was the first time. He said it was shocking to him, right? Give your children an opportunity to be in situations where they're in the minority. This is about wisdom. This is about training, right? This is good things, and this is, I believe, what Proverbs is representing in wisdom. One of the most fundamental principles of wisdom in Proverbs is to teach your children humility. We talked about in the very beginning of our series that it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then we looked at that and we studied it in a biblical sense, and we found that in the biblical sense, fear of the Lord is a humility before God and a humility before others and being teachable. And this is so important. And ultimately, the way that I think we can inspire teachability is to represent teachability personally. To represent that we can be wrong. I think a powerful lesson you can teach your children, and I think a powerful way that you can relate to your parents' kids, is by saying you're sorry, by admitting you're wrong, by admitting you don't know everything. This is a wonderful thing that we can do and a wonderful interaction that we can have as human beings, and this is something that we must model in Proverbs teaches, right? And if we are going to parent like Jesus, and if we're just going to live a better life, if we, by the wisdom of Scripture, we are going to admit when we're wrong and have humility. And then ultimately, this all kind of boils down. And we talked about this several weeks ago. But the best thing we can do, and Proverbs teaches this for our kids. It's better than discipline. It's better than wisdom. It's better than humility, but it involves all those things. It's a love for our Creator, a love for God, and a love for the people around us. If you want to parent like Jesus, if you want to follow the wisdom of Proverbs in relationship to your children, you should demonstrate a love for God. Hopefully your children know of your practice of getting to know Jesus. And you may be watching this, you're like, I don't know anything about this. How do I even start this? Give us a call. Leave a comment down below. We'd love to tell you, give you some hints on Bible study and prayer and how you can walk with Jesus, how you can understand Scripture, and how you can model this to your parents, how you can model this to your children. And kids, if you're watching this and your parents are in a place that you're not comfortable with, you can also model it to your parents. But one of the most fundamental ways you can do this is you look at the people around you and you go, wait a second, if I were in their situation, what would I want somebody to do to me? And then you act in that way towards them. By loving God and loving your neighbor, you will represent and parent like Jesus. Jesus did this. This is what the story of Scripture is about, Jesus coming and caring more about those around him than he cared about himself. It's a powerful thing. But ultimately, all of that comes in Proverbs, but I want to show you something that I think is fantastic, and we usually don't think about it like this, but and I think it's the ultimate guide to parenting like Jesus. And that is when we look at the law of God. So there's something we call the Ten Commandments, well known in the Bible. God spoke to his people thousands of years ago, and he gave them these 10 rules, right? And they're 10 commandments that reveal God's character of unselfish love. But I think in this we see the ideals of parenting like Jesus. And I'm going to run through these, and we'll just take a little time. And some of them are very simple, right? But ultimately, this is very example based. When we are either as children or as parents living this way, we are going to either honor our parents, right, and bring them joy because of our wisdom, or as parents, we're going to guide our children and represent Jesus to them. The 10 Commandments are these. The first one says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. You should love God, right? You should have no other gods before me. This is the idea of the first commandment, right? And we just talked about it. It's an example, right? It's putting God first. And by doing that, you are going to be parenting like Jesus because you're having the character of God. The second one is you must not make for yourself idols. You see, we live in a world where a lot of things are important, right? And the cat's in the cradle. It tells a story of a father whose work was more important than spending time with his son. That's not parenting like Jesus. Jesus says, you're more important than anything else I've got going on. What do you make an idol of? Is it your work? Is it your hobby? Is it your travel? Is it your favorite sports team? Is it your Instagram account? Is it your influence? Is it fill in the blank? God first. Right? But then there shouldn't be an idol that comes before your children. There shouldn't be an idol that comes before your parents. These are powerful things. Third commandment says, don't take the Lord's name in vain, or don't misuse God's name. And this is very much talking about not just the words that we speak, but when we claim to be Christians, when we claim to come alongside God, when we claim to stand for something greater, right? But we act the opposite. It's using the name of God, using the association of God in a vain way. Your kids know. They know what's going on. They know when you say something in public and do something different. Be consistent. Ask forgiveness. Don't represent God in a vain way. And then there comes the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment tells us that we should keep the Sabbath day. We should honor a day of rest once a week. And there's a beautiful thing. It says that in 6 days God made the heavens and earth, and then he rested on the seventh day. But there's this cool thing about the seventh day, because the Sabbath in the commandments, it says to remember, because he knows we're prone to forget. And there's two things that we can remember in Scripture that God represents that he's done for us. First of all, God made a perfect world and gave it to humanity. He says, I want to remember that I did that for you. You didn't deserve it. You didn't do anything to earn it, but I did it and I gave it to you. And then the second thing God did is he came and he lived a perfect life. And Jesus died on a cross and he provided perfect redemption for you and I. And he says, I need you to remember that. Right? The Sabbath connects us to the redemption in Jesus and the creative act of God. Both of these powerful things, right? But it also represents equality. You see, because on the Sabbath, everybody gets a day off. The king gets a day off and the donkey gets a day off. And so we can parent like Jesus by keeping the Sabbath, by representing the equality that the Sabbath stands for, by remembering what God has done for us, remembering that we've been given the ultimate gifts of life and new life in Jesus. Then we come down to the one that talks to children. It says, honor your father and mother. It says, when you do this, you'll have long life. So children, right? We haven't been talking to you much. Seems like we've been talking to parents. Well, that's because the Bible has a lot more to say to parents about their relationship to their children than it does children in relationship to their parents. Because the bulk of responsibility falls on the one with the experience and the one who's supposed to have wisdom. Yeah, that's the parent, right? A lot of times we read Proverbs like, you know, if we don't discipline our children, we're going to spoil them. And we quote that so as a way for me to, kind of like be rigid or be harsh to my children. Well, the Bible is far more leaning towards kindness and long-suffering and not exasperating your children than it is about being harsh. So parents, I think you need to look at it holistically. But children, you should honor your parents. They're the only ones you got. You can't choose them, but they're the only ones you got. Be kind to your parents. Respect your parents. Don't be abstinent to your parents. Don't cause your parents trouble just because you want to, right? Don't be obstinate. And I stand here not in not with a great track record in this. I've been known, in fact, just that long ago, I like to get a rise out of my mother, and sometimes it's funny to me to upset my mom, and that's something I should probably work on. That's something I need to admit I have a fault that I like to do. I introduced my mom to the word trolling because sometimes I like to troll my mom. An example of this story is I was in college and I was doing a class where I had to do a 12-hour shift on an ambulance. And I was in the ambulance with the paramedics. They were sitting in the front and I was in the back, and we were heading to the hospital because we had to transfer someone from one hospital to another. And I called my mom on my cell phone and I said, "Mom, I just wanted you to know I'm in an ambulance on the way to the hospital." And she's like, "Oh, James, what's wrong?" I was like, "It's part of a class. I'm okay." And my mom hung up on me. And she also may have said some choice words to me at the same time. That's not honoring your mother. That's trolling your mother. And it seems funny, but not the best idea. So children, honor your mother. And here's the only place, the only time that you get to not kind of fall in line with your parents is when they are obviously violating one of these other 9 commandments. So we'll get to a couple here. The sixth one says, don't murder, right? So if your parents are wanting you to be involved in something that costs the life of someone else, the Bible would say, take the other route. It says don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't be involved in sexual sin, right? And by doing these, again, parents, you're representing God to your children, and children, you're giving your parents joy in this, right? Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, and don't lie, don't bear false testimony, don't tear someone else down, right? Man, is this a powerful one, because we talked 2 weeks ago about our words, and our words can be powerful for good and bad. Not only should we lie, but we should build each other up. And then the last one is that we shouldn't be obsessed by the things that other people have. We should be content with what we have. You see, parents, this is God's law, which teaches us how to love each other. And if we're going to parent like Jesus, we're going to keep God's law, and that's the best thing we can do for our children. And I'm going to leave you with this piece of advice from my personal experience. And I'm going to share with you a couple of maybe, at least one difficult story. You see, a lot of times in life, we remember things we don't like. And for you parents or you children, I want you to think, and maybe some of the experience you had with a parent, with a grandparent, with somebody who had authority over you, and you think, man, that person, I just didn't like what they did. Or maybe right now, parents, children, you're like, man, I think my parent does this, and I think it's wrong, and I think it's unjust, so on and so forth. That's fine. You should still honor your parents. But remember that thing. And maybe later in life, you'll realize why they were doing what you don't like now. Or maybe later in life, you'll still think, no, that was wrong. That shouldn't have been done. Well, if you think that way later in life, don't do it to your children. Right? A lot of times you hear people saying, well, why are you doing that? Well, my parents did it to me. Well, that's not always a good reason to do something. It may be, but it might not be. So think about that. I'm going to share with you 2 things about my parents. Things I learned. And this comes a little bit negative, and mom and dad, if you're watching, sorry. But one thing that I learned that I didn't want to do for my parents is both my parents, when I was growing up, and even somewhat of an adult, would had points where I felt like they were complaining about their lives and blaming someone else for what their circumstances are, when to me, the main reason they were in the circumstance they were was their choices. And that's something that I learned I didn't want to do from my parents. And we all fall into this, and we all fall in the blame game, and so I'm not trying to disparage my parents. I'm just telling you of a lesson that I learned, and it's come somewhat in the negative. But there's also something I learned from both of my parents that I think is extremely valuable, and I'm thankful for. I learned how to work hard. Both of my parents are incredibly hard workers. As I was growing up, they gave me work to do. They gave me incentives to do work, and I learned to work hard from my parents. Those are lessons that they passed on to me. One somewhat in the negative, the other in a positive sense. And we want to pass on lessons. But ultimately, the thing we can pass on, and we do it by looking at the law of God, which teaches how to love each other, is we want to pass on Jesus. We want to pass on Jesus to everyone we come in contact with. But the first level, the first and the most important is our family. And so, kids out there, you may be the only person who has any knowledge or relationship or desire to know Jesus in your whole family. But you can pass him on to your siblings, to your cousins, to your grandparents, to your aunts, uncles, parents, whatever you're with. Maybe you're in a foster care. You can pass it on. And parents, it is your responsibility as the leader of your home to pass on Jesus. And how do you pass on Jesus? It's you get to know him. Go back and watch the Wisdom series. If you haven't, this is your first one, check it out. See what we've been talking about. There's wisdom in Scripture that is meant to be passed on, and that's the way that we can love our children effectively. It's the way we can love our families. It's by passing on Jesus. So I close with these two questions for you. And I want you to think about these things as you make choices around your family. Can you think of two things that you would like to pass on to your children that you learned from your parents? What are two things? You're like, man, this was really good. My parents worked hard. They were generous. They were kind. I don't know what it is. Are there things that you will do differently than your parents did? Are there things you're like, man, I don't want to pass on that. I learned that this isn't best. I don't want to change it. Last question. Do you know Jesus? Do you really know Jesus? Or is it just something, right? Maybe you're a Christian, but it's just a theory or a cultural thing you've grown up to. Do you know Jesus? And can you pass him on? Because that's the most important thing, is pass on the knowledge of the one who loves us. And if you don't, man, send us a message. We'd love to share Jesus with you. We'd love to talk to you about how you can be in that relationship, because you can't share something you don't have. I pray that you would know Jesus, that you would love Jesus, and that you would be confident that you have no problem passing him on because you trust him with your life. May you be blessed and grow in wisdom.